Hey everyone, and welcome to the Grow Hemp series. Today, we'll be showing you how to regenerate a hemp plant after it's been harvested. This is a continuation of grow log number 2, and in the end of that grow log, after harvesting the plant, I left about 20% of the plant intact, and that's because I'm going to be regenerating this plant. By changing the light cycle from 12 hours a day, which was used to flower the plant, back to 18 hours a day, the plant will go back into its vegetative stage, which will cause it to start growing again. This means new branches, leaves, and of course, flowers for the buds. The key here is to leave a few buds close to the main stem intact, because the new branches will actually be growing out from these buds. So the closer they are to a strong stem, the stronger the new stems will be. So after harvesting the plant, I left a couple of buds near the main stem intact, and I repotted the plant into a new larger pot because it was already root bound. If I wanted to be safe, I could duct tape the top of the main stem that was cut to ensure that it doesn't get infected. But I just left it alone to see if it would work as is. As you can see here, we're in the middle of summer when I started to regenerate this plant. So it was the perfect opportunity to just leave it outside and let it grow on its own. The only thing I did other than transplanting the plant into a bigger pot is that I mixed in a layer of used coffee grounds to the top of the soil, and the first time I watered the plant, I added a full dose of grow nutrients. The grow nutrients gave the plants nitrogen right away, which helps it revert back to the vegetative stage, and the used coffee grounds slowly fed the plants more nitrogen over time as an organic fertilizer. This isn't necessary as I'm still including fertilizer in with the feed, but I had a lot of used K-cups lying around, so since it was free, why not? Now, if you also happen to have a single serving coffee maker that uses K-cups, all you need to do is open up the used coffee cups, take the coffee grounds inside of it, and then mix it in with the top layer of your soil. This works with normal coffee makers as well. After you're done making the coffee, just take the used coffee grounds and do the same thing. The most interesting thing is that all of the initial leaves on the stems had one leaf on them. As the plants grew larger, this changed to 3 leaves and finally the typical 5 leaf we're used to seeing. So while the plant is growing in its vegetative stage, there's a bunch of things I noticed that I wanted to go over about the plant. First of all, I did nothing to the plant other than water and feed it. What you see here is how the plant naturally regenerates. The stems are growing in all directions out of the buds, including downwards. However, they all corrected themselves and started curving upwards towards the light, which is why the plant looks so bushy. I know because of how dense regenerated plants get, that a lot of people will prune all of the leaves near the base of the stem. I didn't do so since the plant seemed healthy with some airflow going through the plants. So it didn't look like there would be any diseases in this case, since it never got dense enough where moisture will get trapped inside of the plant, causing mold and mildew. I also noticed that the plant was extremely resilient to heat stress. I don't know if this is because the plant already had a healthy root structure, or because the clay pot was just being more protective of the roots when compared with a fabric pot. But there were a few heat waves of over 100 degrees throughout this plant's growth cycle, and you wouldn't even know it by looking at the plant. Every other outdoor grow I had at the time were either slowed down by the heat or almost died, which required me to either take the plant indoors or shade and cool down the greenhouse. But this was the only plant that showed no signs of heat issues. I forgot to mention earlier, but both the grow and bloom fertilizers that I used for the plant was from Miracle-Gro's water-soluble plant food and bloom booster. I wanted to try different varieties of fertilizers to get a good gauge of what works and what doesn't, down to the cheapest options possible. Because I know for a lot of people on a budget, every little bit of savings helps, as long as it's not detrimental to the plant. And I have to say that I was pleasantly surprised by the outcome given how bad of a rap cheap fertilizers get. Sure, it's not organic and formulated specifically, but it's cheap, stores well, and made potent buds, which for some people is all they're looking for. I still highly recommend the General Organics Go Box as the standard for new growers, especially because it comes with a lot of excellent supplemental nutrient bottles in case of nutrient deficiencies that might pop up during your grow. But for those on a shoestring budget or only able to buy from big box stores, the cheapest option available still seems to work. Finally, we've gone past the peak of summer, and the days are getting shorter. At this point, the plant is getting about 11 hours of direct sunlight and 1 to 2 hours where there's still a little bit of light outside as the sun rises and sets. You can see now that the flowers are starting to show, and the plant is doing its final stretch before focusing all its energy on producing buds. I was growing a few other plants at the time outdoors, and this was the first plant to go into its flowering stage. Again, I'm not sure if it's because it's a regenerated plant. Of course, in the flowering stage, I also switched from the grow fertilizer back to the bloom fertilizer for the rest of the grow. I did move the plants indoors for a few hours as a prop, so that's why it's missing in the video. So just like when it stretched in the grow tent the first time, this plant grew about 1/3 to 50% of its original height in the beginning of the flowering stage. And as you can see here, the stems are really going crazy with leaves growing between the buds. I've regenerated a couple of plants, and this is not typical. Generally, the stems, after they grow long enough, should resemble a normal stem with a normal amount of leaves. Either way, this made trimming a pain to do because of the extra leaves, but potency-wise, it was just as potent, if not more so, than when I harvested the plant the first time. For the entire flowering stage, other than watering the plant every 2 to 3 days, I pretty much just left it alone, which I recommend for new growers to do as well. If I was looking to maximize yield at this point, I could have used low stress training to pull down the top stem so that all the stems around it would all be the same height, which would help them all get bigger. But for outdoor plants, I generally don't bother with any advanced grow techniques, as the plants already get pretty large on their own. But if you're looking to maximize yield, then low stress training on the top stem, or even on the entire plant with a screen of green, will eke out more from your plants. But if you're still a beginner starting out, I definitely recommend just leaving it alone for your first plant. The buds are growing at a good pace now, and it's hard to tell because everything is just covered in leaves. The trichomes are starting to get cloudy, so I'm starting to flush the plant so I can prepare to harvest the plant in 2 weeks. Flushing basically means that I'm washing out all of the nutrients currently in the soil with water and stop giving the plants any new nutrients so that the plant will pull the rest of the nutrients from the leaves, giving the buds a smoother and cleaner taste. As you can see here, because of the flush, the fan leaves are slowly turning yellow as the plant pulls its nutrients from the leaves. And unfortunately, the camera decided to film the floor for the last few days of the grow. And now to harvest. This was a pain to deal with because of the huge amount of leaves throughout each stem, which made trimming off all the fan leaves take almost twice as long as usual. And I also found a nasty surprise inside the bushy plants: 2 huge caterpillars. Both were hiding in the middle of the plant and ate into a couple of buds, so I had to discard whatever it ate through. Freaking caterpillars. Also, because of this, I decided to wash my plants, since I also found some caterpillar droppings on some of the leaves. I will be going over a full post-harvest wash guide in the next ProTech video, but I'll say this: the washed plants after curing was the cleanest and smoothest smoke I've ever had from an outdoor plant. While for me the difference between flushing and not flushing was really not noticeable, both are pretty smooth, especially for indoor plants. I found that washing the outdoor plants to remove all the bugs, bug waste, dust, pesticides, and God knows what else got in the plants while I was outside really made a big difference in the quality of the buds. So I started with 3 bins, one for a hydrogen peroxide mix that'll disinfect the plants, one for a lemon and baking soda mix that'll clean off any junk attached to the plants, and finally one that's just water to remove any hydrogen peroxide, lemon juice, and baking soda from the plant. I just took each stem, swished it around each of the water bins for about 15 seconds each, and then hung it up to dry. Now, if you're wondering if this will remove any of the cannabinoids from the plant, from a science perspective and also from my experience, no. The trichomes are not water soluble and will stay on the plant throughout the wash process. As you can see here when taking a close-up photo of the plant after washing, all the trichomes are still intact. I hung the plants for a few hours to get rid of the excess water, and now it's time to trim. Unfortunately, because the plants were upside down for a while, the leaves that are on the stem are all facing upwards, which makes it a little more difficult to trim off, but it wasn't too bad. Like usual, I just trimmed off anything sticking out of the buds, nothing too fancy, but I wanted to make sure that anything I left on the stems had a lot of trichomes on them. Of course, because of how bushy the plants were, this took longer than usual, but it wasn't too bad. Now we just hang it in the closet for about 6 days to dry, and even though I washed the plants in water, it seemed to dry faster and more evenly than the plants I haven't washed before, which was really surprising. Now that the plants are dry, I'm cutting the buds off the stems into a glass mason jar and it's ready for curing. In the end, I ended up with about 2 ounces, 3 times more than the original yield of the plant the first time I grew it, but I also had unlimited space to grow the plant this time, unlike the first grow, which was confined in a 2x2x4 grow tent.